Well, I want to start by thank you so much for being here, for being actually our first sponsor. We literally would not be sitting here today if it weren't for Waymo, so we really appreciate it. And for me, I think the heart of this show, this event, and the heart of what we're able to do here is rooted, I think, in this opportunity to sort of mark a historical moment that I think is really important, which is this is the first event like this that we can actually show up to in a fully driverless vehicle. I mean, like that's just exciting. I think that's like a round of applause. But I'm really glad you're here to help us understand sort of like how we got here in a literal sense, but also kind of in a broader metaphorical sense. So let's start. I mean, you were the point person for bringing Waymo to Los Angeles. This was a really huge step in Waymo's journey towards scaling. Talk to us about that process. What's it like going from Phoenix, you had San Francisco, and then LA was this huge step. Walk us through that process of coming here.
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to participate in this panel with you. I joined Waymo 7 years ago, and at that time we were at the very early stages of really thinking about what it took to deploy a rider-only experience. So prior to that, Waymo had really, we started as the Google self-driving car project, and originally we started by experimenting with a product where, there was a person sitting in the driver's seat and kind of watching the car as it was driving on freeways. And what we learned in that experience is that, humans are going to be humans. Humans are going to be distracted. They're going to check their cell phone when they should be driving, when they should be paying attention to the road. And that experience really taught us that we wanted to design an experience where there was no ambiguity about who was in control. And so we shifted focus to really trying to develop a fully autonomous driving system. And that's what really differentiates Waymo. So around the time of late 2017, 2018, we started operating in Chandler. Chandler, Arizona is a pretty residential suburban area outside of Phoenix. And that was a really good proving ground for us to develop the core technology, to develop the frameworks that allow us to assess the safety of the system, and to start to feel confident about what it means to begin to scale. So that was a very kind of early deployment for us that sort of taught us those things and helped us get our legs under us, helped us build that experience, understand what safety means, how to measure it, how to validate it, and so on. And from there through 2019, 2020, we started expanding to San Francisco. Of course, our first deployment is the way that we're bringing this technology to market is through ride hailing. And with ride hailing markets, we want to be in the biggest, densest markets, and we want to be in the places that allow us to advance the driver and make it learn as quickly as possible. And so for us, that means, dense driving environments. So brought the technology to San Francisco, started to scale it up, launched a public service there. And, there was a big gap, admittedly. There was a big gap between what it takes to drive in a city like Chandler versus a city like San Francisco. It's a much more dynamic driving environment. And in doing that, I think we really were able to advance the technology to a point where we feel confident to bring it to market at scale. And I think LA has been kind of one of the sort of first markets where we've really focused on commercialization from the get-go. We had a technology that we felt very confident in deploying. Obviously, we took an incremental path to arriving here in LA, expanding slowly through our road trip program, through our neighborhood tours program, and then very quickly after the first miles that we did here, launching a fully public 24/7 ride-hailing service here in LA.
Yeah.
So it's been a really exciting journey.
Yeah, well, and I have to say, as a writer, it's been so cool to get to see each of these steps. I mean, I'll never forget my first time going writer only in Chandler in 2019. It seems like so long ago now. That was a mind blower. But then, San Francisco was like, seeing these things operating driverlessly in a city that I grew up being like scared to drive in myself, a little bit. And then here, just yesterday, I had my first hour-long Waymo ride. I was like, it's so cool to me as a writer to keep having these new things happening. So technologically, you talked about San Francisco being a big step, and I think frankly, there were a lot of people who were like, oh, Waymo's going to get stuck in Chandler. They're never going to make it in San Francisco. You have to start here to make it. You proved everyone wrong there. Tell me about from San Francisco to here. Let's talk about the technology. how much has to change? Is it a pretty big shift technologically? You've been here for a while. Obviously, you do some mapping. Tell us about that process of coming here on the technology side and how much change you have to do to go from somewhere like San Francisco, which, as you say, is very challenging, but also different, right? Versus somewhere like LA.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of, I would say, two sides to that story. I mean, on the one hand, San Francisco is a very, very dense, dynamic driving environment. But on the other hand, road speeds are a little bit slower. Here in LA, it's not quite as dense necessarily. I mean, certainly in times of rush hour, it can be quite dense, but road speeds are also higher.
Yeah.
The driving behaviors are also different. I mean, I grew up here in LA. I live 10 minutes away, and so I'm very familiar with the various patterns of how people drive in LA. And frankly, they're just different. You hear about the California rolling stop. Humans tend to roll through stop signs. If you pause at a yellow light here and not protected at yellow, you're never going to get the chance to go. And so there's a lot of subtle behaviors that are just different between LA and San Francisco. And I think, when we went to San Francisco, the idea was we want to build technology that generalizes to all of these different driving environments. So the goal was not build something that works specifically for San Francisco. It's build something that's capable of learning what's happening around it. What are the norms? What are the, different rules of the road? And there are many of those that are subtly different in different ways here. But I think what we were pleasantly surprised by was how well it generalized. And that's what allowed us to bring the ride-hailing product and the service to market so quickly, is that actually the Waymo Driver is demonstrating that ability to generalize across these cities very nicely, even though there are important differences to the city.
Yeah, absolutely. No, one of the things, I think it's really important to note in light of sort of our conversation we just had about sort of keeping, why are we doing this all at the center of it all? One of the things I really appreciate about Waymo is when you do go to a new city, it's not just about adapting the technology to the driving in that space and the roads and the signs and stuff. There's really an element of community engagement that goes along with that. Why is that so important? Because I think I think it's easy for folks to see this as a purely technological problem, and they think, if you solve the technology, right, if the thing drives itself safely, like who cares about the rest of it? The rest will all sort of like take care of itself. Waymo doesn't take that approach. Why?
Well, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to really provide the service, right? On the one hand, the technology needs to work, and we're very focused on demonstrating our safety track record, creating an experience where you as a rider feel the safety of the car. When you go in that car and you feel comfortable, you trust that technology very quickly, but that's backed by an empirical safety record. So I think there's just generally a lot of focus on that. And so people tend to think that is sometimes people tend to think that may be the only problem, but actually there's a lot more that goes into building a service and building a business and running a commercial operation. You talked about the community engagement. We want to partner with the cities that we enter. We're looking to provide a valuable service, not just to individual riders, but to the communities in which we operate. And that requires that level of partnership with regulators, with city officials, with community advocacy groups. That's a really important sort of pillar of how we enter cities and how we see ourselves adding value to cities. So that's a very important piece. And I think, there's more to it as well in terms of making sure that we have the operations and the infrastructure ready to scale that service so that we can be in all parts of the city and make ourselves available to as many customers as possible.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things we've learned over time is that safety is a very hard thing. Safety is one of those things that people are like, oh yeah, safety, I know what that means. But there's like a false familiarity because we don't tend to think about it too deeply. And really, I think one of the lessons for me of the last few years is just, and again, it's something that's been a little bit of a cliche almost, that like trust is really the sort of foundation of all of this. But that's really so important, right? That it's not that safety is like the table stakes, but that building trust, finding ways to let people know that you are safe and that you're proving your safety in a credible way. This is a big challenge. Talk to a little bit about how you approach that.
Yeah, I mean, the trust is really important, right? And so that comes from, like I said, developing that empirical safety record, which we can show and people can review transparently. It comes from honest and open engagement with the regulators and the officials that we need to partner with to enter cities. And, I think an important piece of that is the customer experience as well. We want to build trust with our customers that we can deliver a reliable service that's there when you need it, that provides the service levels, and that thinks about, all the subtleties of the customer and the rider experience that are really important to them. Things that, there's a lot of subtleties in that product design that I think really help to take what is first a magical experience when you first get in the car and turn that into a trustworthy experience, something that you can rely on to be there for you always.
Yeah. That's been also one of the other things. And you're right, it's so subtle. So I remember in 2019 when I took my first driver out ride in Chandler, I got to chat with the UX team there about how they were doing the visualization that you see as the passenger. And I think it's so subtle. I'm really glad that I had that opportunity then, 2019, this is, more than 5 years ago now, to see these very, very, very small variations, even, month to month sometimes in what is being displayed to you. As when you have that experience that I've had, to see how that evolved. I think most writers, they don't notice some of these little things, but they do make a huge difference psychologically. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think they emerge at the right time. And I think you'll find as you all ride in the cars, that you'll find these sort of delightful experiences that are really well thought through. I mean, you talked about the in-car experience screen, and there we're not necessarily showing everything that we're seeing about the world. That would be somewhat overwhelming, but we try to pick out the important bits of context that will really make a difference to you as a rider, right? So whether that's, acknowledging that we recognize a complex construction zone, or, as we're pulled over, when a cyclist is passing by, making sure that you're aware that that cyclist is coming. You might not look over your shoulder, but the car is seeing that cyclist and it presents it, and you'll see it in that rare occasion where it'll tell you, hey, careful opening that door. And those subtle touches, I think, are things that will, really please our riders. Another great example of this is the lost and found experience, right? So we're able to detect when you've left something behind in the car and actually send you a notification to say, hey, head back to that car, don't forget your wallet.
Yeah.
So things like that, those are the types of things that we're now really focused on as we're thinking about what it means to build a really great customer experience.
Yeah. No, and yesterday it was April Fool's Day, and so there was a mandatory karaoke session when we start the ride. That was, and so that's something that people are going to notice. But again, little things like, oh, now the vehicle in front of me at the stoplight, I can see that its indicator is on.
That's right.
In the visualization, you can count the number of road traffic cones, and it perfectly matches. And again, these are things that I think, especially for someone like me, I've been riding for a while, and kind of not as, I think, afraid as some people are on their first time, or anxious, I would say. If you have that anxiety and you look at those things and the attention to detail that goes into it, I can see that really being a reassuring thing that, again, maybe only a few people even think about it consciously, but for the rest of the people, it's sort of this subtle, unconscious thing. I think especially in a space where there's so much emphasis on, these futuristic form factors and all this sort of flashy stuff, it's easy to overlook how important lots of little details are in making that experience comforting.
Yeah, and I think one of the important things is that it's a consistent experience, right? We're building one Waymo driver, so that is the experience that you have when you get in that car is going to be the same each time. You don't have to worry about, hey, is your driver paying attention to the construction zones and and the lights on other cars? Well, the Waymo driver always is, and you'll start to see that kind of be repeatable, and that goes to the building trust, like you talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you mentioned sort of this process of scaling. It really looks at this point that this is something that is starting to accelerate, right? So it's a big step to LA, but now you are listing multiple cities where you're going next, not just one at a time anymore. It's multiple. What's fueling that? What's facilitating that?
Well, part of it is we've feel pretty confident in the generalizability of the Waymo driver. Obviously, there are differences in cities like we talked about, and there will be some sort of adjustments, but I think what we're finding is that the incremental effort that goes into preparing to launch a city is becoming less and less over time. We have a better, stronger, more broad track record of driving that we think applies very well to the different driving environments we're operating in. It's powered by the love that we see from our customers. We're seeing that the riders really love the experience. And there's a lot that goes into that. I mean, there's, the quality of the pickups and drop-offs, the quality of the routes. Those things are just getting better and better and better as time goes on. And so that gives us the confidence to feel that, the confidence and the data to demonstrate that we are ready to go to these new cities. We have for a long time been testing in different cities. You hear about the road trips. I think we just announced one in Nashville recently. So more and more of those road trips allow us to make an early assessment of what it's going to be like to drive in that city, make sure that that fits into the profile that the Waymo driver is capable of driving, and we're seeing that envelope broaden and broaden and broaden. So that's really exciting. Yeah, I mean, we are, like you said, we're accelerating our city roadmap launches.
Yeah, it is good to know though that just because you see a Waymo in your city doesn't necessarily mean it's right around the corner, right? But to continue on this thought, I mean, it's not just national anymore. I saw Japan. I mean, again, for with considering how many people over the years I've seen say like, oh, Waymo's going to get stuck somewhere, right? This approach is fundamentally flawed. Well, you're going to Japan. Well, what's that about?
Yeah, so I mean, Japan's a huge market. I think it's a really exciting place to launch. One of the important things about our path is, on the one hand, we are very focused on commercialization, bring the product to the market where people can experience and ride. On the other hand, we still are on a learning journey, and we are trying to put ourselves in environments where we're going to learn as fast as possible, because that's what will ultimately allow us to commercialize as fast as possible. And so, Tokyo, there's a lot of different challenges, driving internationally, driving on the other side of the road, making sure our infrastructure and our tooling that you as a customer might not see, but as a fleet operator, you need to use to operate the fleet at scale, is internationalized and is capable of working with our partners. Those are all kind of important pieces of that story that go beyond, the standard driving commercializing process.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, certainly having done a road trip in Japan myself, it's different. It's I won't say it's necessarily easier or harder, but it is 100% very, very different place to drive than the U.S.
Definitely.
Yeah, so it really highlights that flexibility. So you mentioned commercialization. We're getting low on time. I got to ask you this before we go, because I think for a lot of people, they look at Waymo and they say, technologically, they're doing it. In terms of that user experience, they're doing it. The business, I think, is where you still have things to prove, probably. I mean, what are you doing? How are you tackling the commercialization part of this challenge?
Well, one of the things that I love about being at Waymo personally is, there's a lot of talk about how we are responsible from a safety perspective, but I think that we take very seriously being responsible from a financial and commercial perspective. And what that means internally for us is we do have very crisp commercial goals. And that doesn't just mean top line trips. It means that we are thinking about the health of the business as we're operating in new cities. And so we are very focused on the revenue piece. We are very focused on the operational cost. That's personally where I spend a lot of time, really focused on that cost. And obviously, I'm not going to share specifics today, but we see very, very positive signs about what we are capable of doing commercially. And that's also what is fueling this commercial growth and expansion.
Yeah. So, I mean, at a high level, when you think about the commercialization challenge, is like how much of it is just scaling, right? You get enough scale, you get enough revenue, you get efficiencies of scale. How much of it is that versus sort of potentially, having to bring out new hardware iterations, things like that? Sort of how do those different pieces work?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely doesn't come for free as you scale, right? First of all, scaling is very challenging in the first place. There are important pieces to the puzzle. We're very focused on vehicle platforms and bringing newer vehicle platforms, and continuing to iterate on our self-driving hardware system to bring the cost down and make that even more scalable. And then you think about a lot of the operational pieces that go into it as well. That's kind of another area that we're very focused on, driving down the operational costs and making the system really as efficient and easy to operate. And that tends to be correlated with driving down costs. So, you think about the driving, we focused a lot for many, many years about what it means to drive on public roads. We also need to drive efficiently within our own depots and infrastructure. And that helps to scale up and drive down costs as well.
Yeah, and then just as you prove and validate and refine the technology too. I mean, I noticed that the sort of next generation of hardware, which is already on the roads, I guess, in San Francisco. I haven't seen one myself, but it was so cool hanging out in the prototype when you showed that for the first time. And I really can't wait for my first ride in some of the new hardware that you have coming. But I think, right, like you're seeing the number of sensors come down and stuff. And I think to me that definitely signals what you're talking about in terms of, you're not just obviously you have to scale, right? There's a big incentive for you all to continue to scale. For some, it might seem like, well, to do that, you have to increase the capabilities of this technology, but you're also balancing that with actually costing it down at the same time. That seems like a real tough challenge to manage both of those goals.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of technology, right? Is we can push out the efficient frontier on what we're capable of, right? So we can have more powerful technology at lower cost. And I think that's one of the things that I'm super excited for this next platform is, we're really excited to unlock a whole set of new capabilities at lower cost, right? So that's the platform on which we're going to enter markets where there's heavier snow, for example. And so that, we're seeing that manifest as the technology gets better, is that also the cost is coming down and we're able to scale it up further.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fascinating, so much fun, and my only complaint is I need to talk to the organizers of this event so that we can have a little bit more time to talk, because I feel like we keep running out of time here. Thank you so much for your time. This has been so great.
Thank you for having me.